He sold more than 1 billion records, more than any solo artist in history. He had 149 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. He starred in 31 feature films. He lived in a house called Graceland that is now the second most visited home in America after the White House. We think we know Elvis Presley, the sneer, the swiveling hips, the white jumpsuit, the king. But what if the man behind the image was a stranger? What if the king was a prisoner in his own kingdom? For decades, rumors have circulated about personal journals Elvis kept. Not appointment books, but private, handwritten notebooks filled with his thoughts, fears, and questions. Most scholars dismiss them as myth. But a few years ago, a small leather-bound book was found, tucked away in a dusty box of personal effects from Graceland. And then another, and another. In total, a handful of journals containing sporadic entries from 1956 to the last days of his life in 1977. These are not daily diaries. They are fragmented glimpses into a very private mind. The handwriting is sometimes a neat cursive, sometimes a frantic scrawl. The entries are short, cryptic, and deeply personal. They reveal a man searching for answers, haunted by his past, and terrified of his future. They show a person obsessed with spirituality, numerology, and the meaning of his own life. They are, in a word, puzzling. Here are 18 of the most perplexing entries and the stories they might tell. They don't give us all the answers, but they change the questions we ask about the man we thought we knew. Number 18, what did he mean by the costume? The final entry is dated August 15th, 1977, the night before he died. The handwriting is shaky, barely legible. It's just one sentence. I am so tired of the costume. On the surface, it seems obvious. He was referring to the famous jumpsuits. By 1977, they were elaborate, heavy, and often uncomfortable. They were covered in rhinestones and intricate embroidery. The Sundial jumpsuit he was supposed to wear on the tour starting August 17th weighed a ton. He was overweight, sick, and exhausted. The physical burden of wearing that costume, night after night in hot arenas, must have been immense. It was a symbol of the larger-than-life character he had to play. He wasn't a young rock and roller anymore. He was a 42-year-old man in failing health, trapped in the image of his youth. But the entry feels deeper than that. The costume wasn't just the clothes, it was the entire persona. It was Elvis the King. It was the polite Southern boy who had to say "Seer" and "Mom." It was the electrifying performer who had to deliver the same energy every single night, even when he felt empty. It was the myth, and he was tired of carrying it. Think about what was happening in his life. His health was in a terrible state. He suffered from high blood pressure, an enlarged colon, and glaucoma. His body was a map of pain. To manage it, he was taking a staggering amount of prescription drugs. A 1980 report by the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners found that in the last 20 months of his life, one doctor alone, Dr. George Nicopolis, had prescribed him over 12,000 pills. This wasn't recreational drug use. It was a desperate, chaotic attempt to manage pain, insomnia, and the demands of his career. He was living in a fog. The costume was the mask he wore to hide the decay underneath. Just weeks before he died, a book was published that shattered his public image. It was called Elvis: What Happened, and it was written by 3 of his former bodyguards, Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler. For the first time, the world read about his drug use, his temper, his reclusive lifestyle. Elvis was devastated. He felt betrayed. The book ripped the costume off, exposing the flawed human being he had tried so hard to hide. Larry Geller, his spiritual advisor and hairdresser, said Elvis was in a rage over the book. It confirmed his deepest fear that people would see the real him and reject him. So, when he wrote, "I am so tired of the costume," he was likely talking about all of it. The physical weight of the jumpsuit, the emotional weight of the persona, the mental weight of hiding his secrets. The exhaustion of being Elvis Presley. He was scheduled to fly to Portland, Maine the next day to start another tour. Another string of cities where he would have to put on the costume and be the king one more time. He couldn't face it. The entry is a statement of complete and total exhaustion. It's a surrender. What we still don't know is terrifying. Did he understand on a conscious level that this was the end? Was this entry a quiet goodbye, or was it a final unheard cry for someone to help him take the costume off for good? And if someone had found that journal entry that night, could anything have been done to save him? Number 17 was the badge his shield, an entry from late December 1970. It's written in a clear, determined script. It says, "The badge makes it real. Now I can help." This refers to one of the most bizarre episodes in Elvis's life, his meeting with President Richard Nixon on December 21st, 1970. The story is legendary. Elvis, upset about the drug culture and anti-American sentiment he saw in the country, decided he wanted to do something. He spontaneously flew to Washington, D.C. and wrote a 6-page letter to Nixon on American Airlines stationery. He hand-delivered it to the White House gate. In the letter, he offered his services as a federal agent at large to help fight the war on drugs. He wrote, "I have a great deal of respect for you and will be one of your most loyal supporters." He believed his celebrity status would allow him to connect with young people in a way the government couldn't. Amazingly, Nixon's aide saw a PR opportunity. A meeting was arranged for that same day. Elvis arrived at the White House wearing a purple velvet suit with a huge gold belt buckle and a cape. He brought a gift for the president, a commemorative Colt .45 pistol. During their meeting, Elvis showed Nixon pictures of his family and his police badges from various cities. And he asked Nixon for one thing, a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. Nixon, somewhat bewildered, made it happen. The iconic photo from that meeting shows a dazed-looking Nixon shaking hands with a triumphant Elvis, who is wearing his giant sunglasses and velvet suit. The journal entry, "The badge makes it real. Now I can help," goes to the heart of his motivation. For Elvis, this wasn't a joke. It wasn't a celebrity stunt. He genuinely believed he could make a difference. The badge was a symbol of authority, of legitimacy. It made his personal mission real. In his mind, he wasn't just a singer anymore. He was an undercover agent for his country. This speaks to the strange duality of his life. He was, by this point, deeply dependent on prescription drugs, the very thing he wanted to fight. His longtime physician, Dr. Nikopoulos, later testified that he was trying to control Elvis's intake, not enable it, but the reality was a man trapped in addiction. So, was this a case of extreme denial, or was he trying to save others because he felt he couldn't save himself? Some psychologists, like Dr. Peter Whitmer, author of The Inner Elvis, have suggested it was a desperate attempt to gain control. His own life was spinning out of his control, so he sought a symbol of external control, a federal badge. He was also deeply patriotic. He had served his country in the army from 1958 to 1960. He despised the counterculture he saw as destructive. He wanted to be a hero, a force for good. In his isolated world at Graceland, surrounded by the Memphis Mafia, his sense of reality could become skewed. For him, getting a badge from the president was a logical step, but the phrase, "now I can help," is the most poignant part. It reveals a man who felt helpless. Despite his immense fame and wealth, he saw a country in turmoil and felt powerless. The badge was his key to becoming a participant, not just an observer. It was a shield against his own demons and a weapon he thought he could use to heal a fractured nation. What questions remain? Was this whole episode a sign of a manic state fueled by his drug use and isolation? Or was it a genuine, if misguided, act of patriotism from a man who felt his country was slipping away? And what did he think he was actually going to do with that badge? Number 16, who was the man with no country? This entry is from around 1969. It's short and suspicious. He never wants to leave. A man with no country is a man with no name. This is almost certainly about his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. The relationship between Elvis and the Colonel is one of the most debated in music history. Was Parker a brilliant manager who made Elvis a star? Or was he a manipulative con man who exploited his client for every last penny? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but this journal entry suggests Elvis had his own deep suspicions. The phrase, "a man with no country," is a direct hit. Colonel Parker was not an American citizen. He wasn't even Tom Parker. He was born Andreas Cornelis van Koich in Breda, Netherlands, in 1909. He entered the United States illegally in 1929. Jumping ship in Florida. He served briefly in the U.S. Army, but then went AWOL. He created the Colonel Tom Parker persona, a folksy, cigar-chomping Southern promoter, to hide his past. He never became a U.S. citizen, which meant he never had a U.S. passport. This is the likely reason why Elvis Presley, the biggest star in the world, never toured internationally during his lifetime except for a few shows in Canada in 1957. The offers were staggering. A 1972 offer from a Japanese promoter was for $1 million. But the colonel always turned them down. The official reason was that security was too difficult or the venues weren't good enough. The real reason, as detailed in Alana Nash's definitive biography, The Colonel, was that Parker couldn't leave the country. If he left, he might not be allowed back in. He was, in a very real sense, a man without a country. The entry, "He never wants to leave," shows Elvis was aware of this. He must have questioned why they were turning down millions of dollars to play for his fans in Europe, Asia, or Australia. The Colonel's excuses must have started to wear thin. This entry suggests Elvis was connecting the dots. A man with no name is even more chilling. Did Elvis know Parker's real name? It's unclear, but he sensed the deception. The Colonel was a character, a performance. His entire identity was a fabrication. For a man like Elvis, who was struggling with his own identity, to see this in his manager must have been deeply unsettling. The financial arrangement was also incredibly one-sided. Parker took a 50% commission on many of Elvis's earnings, an unheard of percentage in the industry. Most managers took 10 to 15%. He controlled every aspect of Elvis's career, from the movies he made to the songs he recorded. After Elvis died, a 1980 investigation by probate judge Joseph Evans concluded that Parker's management was unethical and that he had acted against his client's best interests. This journal entry is a crack in the facade. It shows that Elvis wasn't just a passive victim. He was questioning, he was suspicious, he felt trapped by a man whose entire life was a secret. So, the questions that linger are profound. How much did Elvis really know about the Colonel's past? Did he ever confront him about it? And was his loyalty to the Colonel a form of Stockholm Syndrome? Or did he genuinely believe he couldn't survive in the industry without this mysterious, controlling figure by his side? Rule number 15, was he talking to the sky? A strange, undated entry, likely from the late 1960s, written during a trip through Arizona. The desert is not empty. A light followed us tonight. Not a car, not a star. It knew we were there. This taps into Elvis's deep spiritual and mystical side, a part of him that was almost entirely hidden from the public. He was a voracious reader of spiritual books, and he was fascinated by the unknown. This entry documents an event that his spiritual advisor, Larry Geller, has spoken about extensively. According to Geller's book, If I Can Dream Elvis's Own Story, he and Elvis were driving through the Arizona desert at night when they saw a strange light in the sky. It wasn't an airplane or a helicopter. It seemed to pace their car, moving in ways that conventional aircraft could not. Geller described Elvis as being completely mesmerized, not scared. He felt it was a sign, a form of communication. This wasn't an isolated incident. Elvis had a lifelong fascination with the unexplained. He reported seeing a strange blue light in the sky over the family home in Tupelo on the night he was born. He and Geller often discussed UFOs, psychic phenomena, and life on other planets. This was part of his broader spiritual quest. He was looking for answers that organized religion couldn't provide. He felt a connection to a reality beyond the one we can see and touch. The context of the late 1960s is important. This was a time of great spiritual exploration in America. Eastern philosophies were becoming popular. The counterculture was questioning everything, and there was a massive wave of UFO sightings and interest in extraterrestrial life. In books like Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, which proposed that ancient myths were actually records of alien visitations, were bestsellers. Elvis was not immune to these cultural currents. In fact, he was deeply immersed in them. The journal entry is powerful because of its simplicity. It knew we were there. This suggests a conscious, intelligent force. For Elvis, this wasn't just a random atmospheric event. It was a personal experience. It was confirmation that the universe was far more mysterious and complex than most people believed. For a man who felt so isolated by his fame, the idea of a connection to something so vast and otherworldly must have been incredibly comforting. It was a reminder that he was part of something bigger than the screaming crowds in the Hollywood soundstages. This spiritual searching was a core part of his later life. It was his private escape. While the world saw the rock and roller, the movie star, the Vegas entertainer, the private Elvis was a mystic, a seeker, a man who stared up at the desert sky and felt it staring back. But the questions remain. What did they really see that night in the desert? Was it a genuine, unexplained phenomenon, or was it a product of two spiritually inclined minds looking for a sign? Did these experiences shape his view of life and death, and did they offer him a sense of peace that his earthly life could not provide? Number 14, who was the I? A short, powerful entry from 1965. It's a direct quote. I am not the body, I am not the mind, so who is this I that is left? This is not Elvis's own prose. It's a paraphrase of a central concept from a book that profoundly changed his life, The Impersonal Life. This small, anonymously published book from 1914 became Elvis's personal Bible. He discovered it in 1964, at a time when he was feeling lost and disillusioned with his Hollywood career. His hairdresser and spiritual confidant, Larry Geller, introduced him to it. The book's central message is that the true self, the I am, is not the physical body or the individual personality, but a piece of the divine, a consciousness that is part of God. It teaches a form of practical mysticism, encouraging the reader to separate their true eternal self from their temporary earthly existence. For Elvis, this was a revelation. He was trapped in the persona of Elvis Presley, a global commodity. He was a body that people screamed at. He was a mind that had to remember lines for terrible movies. The idea that his true self was something separate, something pure and untouched by fame, was incredibly liberating. He gave copies of The Impersonal Life to everyone in his inner circle. He carried it with him everywhere. Priscilla Presley, in her memoir Elvis and Me, wrote about how he would read from it for hours, trying to share its message with her and the Memphis Mafia. This journal entry shows him grappling with the core teaching of the book. He's not just reading the words, he's internalizing the question. If he is not the body that is getting older and the mind that is filled with anxieties, then what is the essence of his being? It was a search for his soul. This quest led him to a whole library of esoteric books. Geller brought him works by Madame Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy Paramahansa Yogananda, who wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, and the mystic G.I. Gurdjieff. Elvis devoured them all. He was looking for a universal truth, a spiritual framework that could make sense of his extraordinary, chaotic life. This entry reveals the intellectual and spiritual depth of the man. The public image was of a simple country boy who got lucky. The reality was a man engaged in a serious, lifelong philosophical inquiry. He was trying to understand the nature of consciousness, the meaning of life, and his place in the cosmos. He was trying to find a stable center in the hurricane of his fame. The I he was searching for was the real person, the one who existed before the world named him Elvis. This leads to some profound unknowns. Did this spiritual quest bring him peace, or did it create more confusion by separating him further from the world? Was his later drug abuse a contradiction of these spiritual beliefs, or was it a desperate attempt to quiet his mind and reach a different state of consciousness, a shortcut to the spiritual plane he read about? Number 13. Why was the nursery empty? This entry is from 1972, not long before his divorce from Priscilla became final. It's filled with a quiet sadness. A big house with only one little girl's laugh. A nursery should not be empty. Lisa Marie, his only child, was born in 1968. He adored her. By all accounts, he was a doting, if unconventional father. He showered her with gifts and affection. She was the undisputed princess of Graceland. But this entry reveals a longing for more. He had always wanted a son. He often spoke of wanting a boy to carry on his name. This desire was likely rooted in his own childhood. His own father, Vernon, was a constant presence in his life, and Elvis felt a deep sense of family loyalty. He wanted to recreate that. More than that, having another child, especially a son, might have felt like a way to mend his fracturing family. His marriage to Priscilla was falling apart. They had married in 1967, but the relationship was complex and strained. He was often on the road, and his lifestyle was not conducive to a stable family life. Priscilla, who was very young when they met, had grown into a woman with her own needs and desires. She had an affair with her karate instructor, Mike Stone. Elvis was devastated by this, though he himself had had numerous affairs. Their separation in early 1972 was a deep blow to him. The empty nursery is a powerful metaphor for his feelings of loss and failure. Graceland was a huge 23-room mansion, but with Priscilla gone and just one child, it must have felt cavernous and lonely. He was surrounded by the Memphis Mafia, but that was not the same as a family. The entry suggests a yearning for the noise and life of a bigger family, a way to fill the echoing silence of his home and his heart. It also connects back to his own birth. He was born a twin, but his identical brother Jesse Garon was stillborn. This loss haunted him his entire life. He always felt like a part of him was missing. Perhaps the desire for more children was a way to fill that primal void, to create the family that was taken from him at the very beginning. According to his cousin, Billy Smith, who lived at Graceland, Elvis would often talk to his deceased brother late at night. So, the empty nursery wasn't just about a room in the house, it was about the empty spaces in his life. The space left by his failing marriage, the space he couldn't fill with friends or fans, and the deep, lifelong space left by the brother he never knew. The questions this leaves are deeply personal. Did he blame himself for his inability to hold his family together? Did he see having another child as a way to get a second chance at the family life he craved? And how much of his deep, often overwhelming loneliness stemmed from the feeling that his own family was incomplete? Number 12. What did singing to a clam feel like? A frustrated, angry entry from 1966 in the middle of his Hollywood period. Another day. Another stupid song. Today I had to sing to a clam. A clam. I think I'm losing my mind. This entry perfectly captures the artistic despair Elvis felt during the mid-1960s. After leaving the army in 1960, his career was largely controlled by Colonel Parker, who saw movies as the primary moneymaker. Elvis was signed to a series of long-term contracts with Hollywood studios that required him to make up to 3 movies a year. The films were formulaic and low budget. They featured flimsy plots, exotic but fake locations, and a string of beautiful co-stars. And each one required a soundtrack album filled with forgettable, often ridiculous songs. The quality of both the films and the music declined steadily throughout the decade. Titles like Harum Scarum, Paradise, Hawaiian Style, and Double Trouble became synonymous with schlock. The reference to singing to a clam is likely from the 1967 film Clambake. While he doesn't literally sing to a clam in the movie, the title song and the silly plot represented the nadir of his career. He was a pioneer of rock and roll, a man whose voice had changed the world. Now he was a musical jukebox churning out songs like Do the Clam and Queenie Waheen's Papaya. This journal entry shows the toll it was taking on him. He wasn't just phoning it in, he was in agony. He knew the material was terrible, he felt like a joke. The raw, rebellious energy of his Sun Records days was gone, replaced by a sanitized, family-friendly caricature. Jerry Schilling, a longtime friend and member of the Memphis Mafia, wrote in his book Me and a Guy Named Elvis that Elvis would often complain bitterly about the scripts and the songs. He felt trapped by his contracts and by the Colonel's relentless focus on money over art. The line, "I think I'm losing my mind," is not just hyperbole. He was in a creative prison, and it was causing him genuine psychological distress. He was an artist who was being denied the ability to create anything meaningful. This period of his life is often seen as a commercial success, but an artistic wasteland. He was making millions of dollars, but he was losing his soul. This period of frustration is what made his 1968 television special, often called the 68 Comeback Special, so explosive. For the first time in years, he was in control of the music. Dressed in black leather, he looked lean, dangerous, and re-energized. The performance was raw, powerful, and authentic. It was the sound of a man breaking free from his cage. It was him telling the world and himself that the real Elvis was still in there. But this journal entry shows us the depths of his despair before that comeback. It was the feeling of being a puppet, of having his immense talent squandered on nonsense. The questions that arise are about the path not taken. What kind of music would he have made in the 1960s if the Colonel had let him? How would he have responded to the British invasion, the rise of Bob Dylan, and the psychedelic revolution? And did the years spent singing to a clam do permanent damage to his artistic confidence and his creative spirit? Number 11 was the Black Belt of God, an entry from the early 1970s at the height of his karate obsession. In the dojo, there is no king, no crown, only discipline. Control the pain, control the self. The black belt is God. Elvis's passion for martial arts was not a casual hobby. It was a central part of his life for nearly 2 decades. He was introduced to it in the Army in 1958 and continued to study and practice it until his death. He earned his first degree black belt in 1960. By 1974, he had been promoted to an 8th degree black belt. This journal entry explains the why. For Elvis, karate was more than just a form of self-defense. It was a spiritual and psychological refuge in a life that was filled with chaos, adulation, and a lack of real boundaries. The dojo was a place of order and discipline. As he writes, there is no king. Inside the dojo, he wasn't the famous Elvis Presley. He was a student bowing to his instructor, subject to the same rules as everyone else. It was one of the few places where he could escape his own fame. The phrase, control the pain, control the self is incredibly revealing. Physically, he was in chronic pain from various health issues. Karate, with its focus on mental discipline over physical sensation, was a way to manage that. But the pain was also emotional and psychological. The pain of his mother's death, the pain of his broken marriage, the pain of his isolation. He believed the discipline of karate could give him mastery over his inner demons. Calling the black belt God is a powerful statement. It suggests that he found a form of salvation in the practice. Traditional religion offered him comfort, but karate offered him a practical, physical path to self-control. It was a belief system written on the body. He spent hours a day training. He founded his own dojo in Memphis. He incorporated karate moves into his stage performances, the famous lunges and chops becoming a signature part of his 1970s act. His main instructor was Ed Parker, no relation to the Colonel, a renowned Kenpo karate master. Parker became a close friend and confidant. Through karate, Elvis found a brotherhood that was different from the Memphis Mafia. It was based on mutual respect and a shared discipline. However, there was a darker side. Some have argued that his obsession with accumulating higher-level belts and his sometimes grandiose demonstrations of his skills showed that his ego was still very much in play. He would stage elaborate demonstrations, breaking boards, and showing off his techniques. Was it a genuine search for humility, or another way to prove he was the king? The questions this entry raises are complex. Was karate a genuine path to enlightenment for him, or did it become another prop in the Elvis performance? Did the discipline it taught him help him manage his life, or did it give him a false sense of control while other areas, like his prescription drug use, were spiraling? Number 10 was The Old Elvis Gone. This entry is from mid-1968, just before filming his landmark television special. It's written with a mix of fear and defiance. Binder wants the real me. The Colonel wants the same old Christmas songs. They all want to see the old Elvis. But he's gone. I don't know who they'll get. This captures the immense pressure and the personal crossroads Elvis faced in 1968. His career was in a slump. His movies were flopping. He hadn't had a #1 hit single in 6 years. He was seen by many as a relic of the 1950s, irrelevant in the age of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Vietnam War. The TV special, sponsored by Singer Sewing Machines, was supposed to be a standard, family-friendly Christmas show. Colonel Parker had it all planned out Elvis in a tuxedo, singing holiday favorites. But the show's young, ambitious director, Steve Binder, had a different vision. He saw the fire still burning inside Elvis. He wanted to strip away the Hollywood gloss and remind the world of the raw, sexual, and dangerous performer Elvis had been. Binder wants the real me, Elvis writes. This was both thrilling and terrifying. Elvis hadn't performed live for an audience in over 7 years. He was insecure about his weight, his career, and whether people would still care. The conflict between Binder's vision and the Colonel's is at the heart of the entry. The same old Christmas songs represent the safe, boring, and commercial path the Colonel always chose. The real me represented a huge risk. If it failed, his career might be over for good. The most haunting line is, "But he's gone. I don't know who they'll get." This reveals his deep self-doubt. After years of making bland movies and singing terrible songs, he wasn't sure if the old Elvis, the rebellious rock and roller, even existed anymore. Had Hollywood killed him, he was afraid that when he stepped onto that stage, nothing would be there. What happened next is television history. Elvis sided with Binder. They compromised on the Christmas theme by including one holiday song, but the bulk of the show was pure, uncut Elvis. The highlight was the Unplugged segment, where Elvis, dressed head to toe in black leather, sat in a circle with his original band members, Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana, and jammed. It was intimate, spontaneous, and electrifying. He was funny, self-deprecating, and his voice was more powerful than ever. He wasn't the old Elvis. He was something new, a mature, seasoned artist reclaiming his legacy. The special was a massive critical and commercial success. It relaunched his career and led directly to his triumphant return to live performing in Las Vegas. This journal entry shows us the man at the edge of the abyss just before his greatest triumph. He was standing between his past and his future, between the safety of the Colonel's cage and the terrifying freedom of artistic expression. We are left to wonder, what would have happened if he had listened to the Colonel and just sung the Christmas songs? Would his career have faded into obscurity? And was the confidence we see in that black leather performance real? Or was it the ultimate act from a man who, just weeks before, wasn't even sure who he was anymore? Number 9. What was the sound of the noise? An undated entry, probably from the early 1970s, written late at night at Graceland. So many brothers in this house. So much noise. Laughing, talking, TVs on all night, but I can't hear my own thoughts. This speaks to the paradox of Elvis's life at Graceland. He was famously reclusive, yet he was never alone. He was constantly surrounded by his entourage, the Memphis Mafia. This was a rotating group of friends, relatives, and employees who lived with him, traveled with him, and worked for him. They were his companions, his bodyguards, and his buffer against the outside world. On the one hand, they provided camaraderie and loyalty. They were the court of the king. Life at Graceland was a 24/7 party. They would have water gun fights, rent out movie theaters and amusement parks for all-night sessions, and stay up until dawn talking and watching TV. For a man who couldn't walk down the street like a normal person, they were his connection to a semblance of normal friendship. But this journal entry reveals the downside. So much noise. The constant activity was a way to keep the silence at bay. And in the silence, Elvis would have to confront his own thoughts, his own loneliness. The entry suggests that the boisterous environment, which he himself created, was also a kind of prison. He couldn't find the quiet space to simply be with himself. The line, "I can't hear my own thoughts," is a cry of desperation. Was he surrounding himself with people to avoid the man in the mirror? Did the noise of the entourage drown out the voice of his own fears and anxieties? Many have argued that the Memphis Mafia were also enablers. They were on his payroll. It was difficult for them to say no to him, whether it was about a crazy spending spree or his increasing reliance on prescription medication. Their job was to keep him happy, and that sometimes meant insulating him from reality. The publication of the book Elvis: What Happened in 1977 by former members Red and Sonny West was a deep betrayal precisely because it broke the code of silence that surrounded this inner circle. It brought the private, often dysfunctional reality of life at Graceland into the public eye. This journal entry, written years before that book, shows that Elvis himself felt the suffocating nature of his insulated world. He craved the loyalty and companionship, but he also recognized that it came at a cost, the loss of his own inner peace. He was the king of a very loud, very crowded, and very lonely kingdom. The questions this leaves are about the nature of friendship and fame. Were the Memphis Mafia true friends, or were they simply well-paid courtiers? Did Elvis choose this life of constant noise, or did he feel he had no other way to cope with the pressures of his fame? And in the end, was he more lonely in a room full of his brothers than he would have been all by himself? Number 8. Would his mother know him? This entry is dated August 14th, 1968, the 10th anniversary of his mother's death. It is simple and heartbreaking. 10 years. She wouldn't know me now. I hope she can't see me. The relationship between Elvis and his mother, Gladys Presley, was the central emotional anchor of his life. He was her only surviving child, her little baby. They were incredibly close, sharing their own private language and an intense bond. Her death from a heart attack in 1958, while he was in the army, was the single greatest trauma of his life. He was utterly devastated. Many friends and biographers, including Peter Guralnick in his masterful Last Train to Memphis, believe that a part of him died with her. He never fully recovered from the loss. This journal entry, a decade later, shows that the grief was still raw. The line, "She wouldn't know me now," is a confession of how much he felt he had changed. In 1958, he was still the rebellious young rock and roller, but he was also her devoted son. By 1968, he was a Hollywood star, a wealthy man, married, and about to become a father. But he was also a man adrift, lost in the Hollywood machine, and starting down the path of prescription drug use. He felt he had strayed far from the simple church going boy Gladys had raised. He felt he had disappointed her. The final sentence, "I hope she can't see me," is a cry of shame. It's a devastating admission. He didn't want the person he loved most in the world to see what he had become. At this point in 1968, he was on the cusp of his great comeback. From the outside, it might have looked like he had everything. But inside, he felt unworthy of his mother's love. He was judging himself through her eyes and finding himself lacking. This feeling of shame likely fueled both his best and worst impulses. The desire to make her proud might have been a driving force behind the incredible power of the '68 comeback special. He wanted to prove he was still the man she believed in, but the shame might also have fueled his self-destructive behavior. It was a vicious cycle. The more he felt he was letting her down, the more he might have turned to pills to numb the pain, which in turn made him feel even more ashamed. He kept her room at Graceland just as she had left it. He would often go in there and talk to her. She remained the most powerful presence in his life long after she was gone. Her death at the age of 46 also created a deep fear in him about his own mortality. He had a premonition that he too would die young. The questions that remain are haunting. Was Elvis's entire life, after 1958, an attempt to deal with the overwhelming grief of losing his mother? Did his search for spiritual answers stem from a desperate desire to reconnect with her in the afterlife? And could he have ever found true peace and happiness? Or was he destined to forever feel like a lost boy searching for his mother? Number 7. Who was the German girl? A brief, nostalgic entry from the mid-1960s. Thinking of Germany, the snow, that little apartment. A simple life was possible once, before everything. When most people think of Elvis in Germany, they think of Priscilla Beaulieu, the 14-year-old daughter of an Air Force captain whom he met in 1959 and would later marry. But she was not the only significant relationship he had during his army service from 1958 to 1960. This entry hints at a different path, a different life. During his first year in Germany, Elvis was involved with a young German woman named Elisabeth Stefaniak. She was his live-in secretary and translator, but their relationship was also romantic and deeply personal. They lived together in an apartment off base in Bad Nauheim. For a brief period, Elvis experienced a life that was remarkably normal. He went to the movies, ate in local restaurants, and had a semblance of a private life, away from the constant hysteria of his fame in America. The reference to that little apartment and a simple life almost certainly refers to this time with Elizabeth. It was a bubble of normalcy in the midst of his global fame. The before everything likely refers to before his return to America, before the Colonel's movie machine kicked into high gear, and before his life became a permanent cage of fame and expectation. It may also refer to the beginning of his relationship with the much younger Priscilla, a relationship that would define so much of his future. According to Stefaniak's own account, she and Elvis were very close. He talked to her about his fears and his dreams. It was a mature relationship, unlike the one he was beginning to cultivate with the teenaged Priscilla. When Elvis returned to the States, he brought Elizabeth with him, and she continued to work for him at Graceland for a time. But the relationship ended as his focus shifted entirely to Priscilla. This journal entry is a wistful look back. In the mid-1960s, Elvis was trapped in his Hollywood career, feeling like a product. He was looking back at his time in Germany and remembering a moment when another future seemed possible. A simpler life. A life with a woman who knew him not as a superstar but as a young soldier living in a small German town. It's a classic case of the road not taken. It humanizes him tremendously. It shows that he, like anyone, wondered about his past choices. The life of a global icon was not always the life he wanted. The entry expresses a deep nostalgia for a time when his world was smaller, quieter, and maybe more real. The questions it raises are intriguing. What if he had chosen a different path? Was his relationship with Elizabeth Stefaniak more significant than the official narrative of his life allows? And did the memory of that simple life in Germany make the gilded cage of Graceland feel even more suffocating? Number 6. What did he see in her eyes? A disturbing entry from 1967, shortly after his marriage to Priscilla. I look at her sometimes and I see a little girl, not a woman. I made her. She is what I wanted. Is that love? This is one of the most complex and troubling entries. It goes to the very heart of his relationship with Priscilla. They met in Germany in 1959 when he was 24, and she was 14, he was immediately captivated by her. After he returned to the U.S., he convinced her parents to let her move to Memphis and live at Graceland under the supervision of his father and stepmother to finish high school. He took control of her life. He dictated her hair color, her makeup, her clothes. He was, in his own words, trying to create his perfect woman. He was molding her. Priscilla's own memoir, Elvis and Me, details this process. He wanted a virgin, someone untouched by the world, whom he could shape in his own image. This journal entry shows his awareness of what he had done. I made her. She is what I wanted. It's a statement of both pride and confusion. He had succeeded in creating his ideal partner. But the question that follows
Is that love?
reveals a deep, unsettling doubt. Can you truly love a creation? Or is that just a form of control, a love of one's own power? The line, "I see a little girl, not a woman," is also telling. By shielding her from the world and controlling her development, he had in some ways stunted her growth into an independent adult. The very quality that had attracted him to her youth and innocence was now a source of conflict in their marriage. He had a wife who was, in many ways, still a child, because that is how he had designed her. This dynamic ultimately doomed their marriage. As Priscilla entered her late 20s, she began to crave her own identity. She wanted to explore the world as her own person, not as Elvis's living doll. Her affair with Mike Stone was a rebellion, a way to discover herself as a woman separate from Elvis. This entry is a moment of chilling self-awareness for Elvis. He's confronting the strange, Pygmalion-like nature of his most important romantic relationship. He is questioning the very foundation of his marriage. It wasn't a partnership of equals. It was a relationship between a creator and his creation. And he seems to be realizing, perhaps for the first time, that this might not be the same thing as love. The unanswered questions are profound. Was his desire to mold Priscilla a result of his own insecurities and need for control? Did he love her, or did he love the idea of her? And was he capable of having a relationship with a strong, independent woman, or was he fated to repeat this pattern of control? Number 5, when was the only real music? An entry from the late 1960s, written in the early hours of the morning. The boys are all gone to bed. It's quiet now. Just me and the piano. This is the only real music. The only time I'm talking to God. This reveals where Elvis found his true musical soul. It wasn't in rock and roll. It wasn't in the pop songs from his movies. It was in gospel music. From his earliest childhood in Tupelo, Mississippi, Elvis was immersed in the music of the church. He attended the Assembly of God Church with his parents, and the passionate, soulful sounds of gospel hymns were his first musical influence. It was music that was about pure emotion, about struggle, and about faith. It was the bedrock of his musical identity. Throughout his life, even at the height of his fame, gospel music was his private refuge. After his shows in Las Vegas, he would often stay up all night with his backup singers like J.D. Sumner and the Stamps or the Imperials and sing gospel songs until dawn. These were informal, joyful jam sessions away from the demands of the audience and the constraints of a setlist. It was music for its own sake. This journal entry captures the intimacy of those moments. Just me and the piano. It was when he was alone or with a small group of trusted friends that he could connect with the music that meant the most to him, is the line. This is the only real music is a powerful statement. It suggests that he saw much of his professional output, the very music that made him famous, as somehow less authentic, less meaningful. The only time I'm talking to God. This connects his musical passion directly to his spiritual quest. For Elvis, singing gospel wasn't a performance, it was a form of prayer. It was his way of communicating with the divine, of asking for forgiveness, and of expressing his deepest hopes and fears. It was in the harmonies of a song, like "How Great Thou Art" or "Peace in the Valley," that he found a sense of transcendence that his chaotic life rarely offered. It's a fascinating irony that the only Grammy Awards Elvis ever won for his music, 3 of them, were for his gospel recordings. The industry that crowned him the king of rock and roll only formally recognized his genius in the genre that he considered his spiritual home. This entry pulls back the curtain on the performer and shows us the worshiper. It reminds us that behind the sneer and the swiveling hips was a man with a deep and abiding faith, a faith that was most powerfully expressed not in a church pew, but at a piano keyboard in the middle of the night. The questions that remain are about his public legacy. If gospel was his only real music, did he resent the rock and roll persona that the world demanded of him? Did he feel like his greatest musical gift was the one that the majority of his fans knew the least about. And what would his career have looked like if he had been free to follow his heart and become a full-time gospel singer? Number 4, what fire did they start? A nostalgic entry from the 1970s, looking back. Son, Sam, Johnny and Jerry Lee and Carl. Just 4 boys playing with fire. We didn't know what we were starting, we were just trying to burn down the house. This is a direct reference to one of the most legendary moments in rock and roll history, the $1 Million Quartet session. On December 4th, 1956, Elvis Presley, who was already a huge star and had moved from Sun Records to the major label RCA, dropped by his old stomping ground, Sun Studio in Memphis. The owner and producer, Sam Phillips, was in the middle of a recording session with Carl Perkins. What happened next was pure magic. Jerry Lee Lewis, a then unknown piano player, was also in the studio. And soon, Johnny Cash, another Sun artist, showed up. The 4 young musicians started an impromptu jam session. They sang gospel hymns, country songs, and early rock and roll hits. A local newspaper reporter was called, and a photographer captured the iconic image of the 4 of them gathered around the piano. The recordings of that session, which were not officially released for many years, are a priceless document of a unique moment in time. The journal entry, just 4 boys playing with fire, perfectly captures the spirit of that day. They were all young, full of raw talent and ambition. They were at the very beginning of a musical revolution that they were helping to create. The rock and roll was still new, dangerous, and exciting. It was fire. We didn't know what we were starting. This line is full of the wisdom of hindsight. In 1956, they were just having fun, making music they loved. They had no idea that they were laying the foundation for decades of popular music to come. They were changing culture, breaking down racial barriers by blending black rhythm and blues with white country music and giving a voice to a new generation. We were just trying to burn down the house. This is a fantastic metaphor for the rebellious energy of early rock and roll. It was about shaking up the establishment, challenging the staid, predictable pop music of the day. It was loud, energetic, and a little bit dangerous. It was the sound of freedom. By the 1970s, when Elvis wrote this entry, he was the establishment. He was a Las Vegas institution. The wild, unpredictable energy of those Sundays was long gone, replaced by a polished, professional, but often sterile stage show. This entry shows him looking back with fondness and perhaps a bit of sadness at a simpler, more exciting time. It was a time of brotherhood and shared purpose, before he became an isolated icon. He was remembering when he was just one of the boys, not the king. This leaves us to wonder about his journey. Did he miss the creative chaos of those early days? Did he feel that the fire he helped start had somehow consumed him, trapping him in the very establishment he had once sought to burn down? And what did he think when he looked back at that photo of 4 young rebels, knowing the different and often tragic paths their lives would take? Number 3, who wore the costume? An entry from the early 1970s during the peak of his Las Vegas era. Another show, the lights, the screams. I put on the jumpsuit and the cape. It feels like I'm wearing a costume of myself. This is a profound and sad insight into his state of mind during the years that many saw as his triumphant return. After the '68 comeback special, Elvis returned to live performing with a legendary series of shows at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. He was a sensation, he broke attendance records, and redefined the Vegas residency. A key part of these shows was the wardrobe. The famous white jumpsuits designed by Bill Ballou became his signature look. They were ornate, flamboyant, and larger than life, with high collars, bell-bottoms, and elaborate embroidery. They were accessorized with capes and oversized belts. They turned him into a real-life superhero, a god on stage. But this journal entry reveals his true feelings about them. It feels like I'm wearing a costume of myself. The persona of Elvis the Vegas superstar was just that, a persona, a role he was playing. The jumpsuit was the costume for that role. He was no longer just being Elvis, he was performing an imitation of Elvis. The image had become so powerful that it had separated from the man. He had to put on a costume to look like the person he was supposed to be. This speaks to a deep sense of identity loss. The spontaneous, raw energy of his early years had been replaced by a highly choreographed professional production. He was a brand. The screams he heard were for the costume, for the image, not necessarily for the man inside it. And the man inside it was feeling increasingly disconnected. This feeling is a common affliction of long-term, massive fame. The public persona becomes a caricature, and the real person gets lost underneath. There's Michael Jackson, another artist who lived in a similar bubble of fame, expressed similar feelings. For Elvis, the jumpsuit was the ultimate symbol of this separation. It was both his armor on stage and the uniform of his prison. The line is also incredibly lonely. To feel like an imitation of yourself is to be profoundly disconnected. It suggests that the person on stage was a hollow shell, and the real Elvis was somewhere else, watching the performance from a distance, unable to connect. The questions this raises are central to understanding his final years. Who was Elvis Presley when the jumpsuit came off at the end of the night? Did he even know anymore? Did he feel that the fans only loved the costume, and that if they saw the real flawed man underneath, they would abandon him? And was the self-destructive behavior of his final years a way of trying to feel something real, to break through the artifice of the costume he wore every day? Number 2, was it just for her? In a very early entry from 1956, not long after his first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, became a massive hit. It's written in a neat, youthful hand. Everything is moving so fast. The television, the crowds, everyone knows my name. But I still just hear that first record. Just a boy's voice, nothing special. But it was for her. This entry takes us back to the very beginning. In the summer of 1953, an 18-year-old Elvis Presley walked into the Memphis recording service, the home of Sun Records. He paid about $4 to record 2 songs, My Happiness and That's When Your Heartaches Begin, directly onto an acetate disc. The famous story is that he told the receptionist, Marion Keisker, that he was making a record as a gift for his mother, Gladys. This journal entry, written 3 years later when he was the most famous person in America, shows that this initial simple act was still his emotional touchstone. In the middle of the whirlwind of fame, the television, the crowds, he is grounding himself by remembering why he started. It wasn't for the money or the fame. It was a simple, loving gesture. It was for her. The humility in the entry is striking. Just a boy's voice, nothing special. By 1956, his voice was one of the most famous on the planet. Critics and fans were mesmerized by its power, its range, its unique blend of blues, country, and pop. But in his own mind, he strips all of that away and goes back to that first unpolished recording. He still sees himself as that nervous teenage boy. This entry provides a crucial insight into his motivation. At his core, his connection to his mother was the driving force. Pleasing her, making her proud, was his primary goal. The fame and fortune were byproducts. This maternal connection was both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. It gave him an emotional anchor, but it also meant that her approval was the standard by which he judged everything. Thinking about this simple origin, in the midst of his meteoric rise, reveals the disorientation he must have felt. One day he was a truck driver making a record for his mom. The next, he was a cultural phenomenon causing riots. It's no wonder he held on to that first pure memory. It was the only thing that was simple and clear in a life that was becoming incredibly complicated. This entry sets the stage for the rest of his life. The boy who sang for his mother would become the man who was haunted by her death, who felt he could never live up to her memory. The pure impulse to create a gift of love would become tangled up in the demands of commerce, contracts, and the expectations of millions. The questions this entry leaves us with are about the nature of innocence and fame. Did that simple, loving impulse get lost along the way, buried under the weight of being the king? Did he spend the rest of his life trying to recapture the purity of that first recording? And in his darkest moments, did he feel that the boy, who just wanted to sing a song for his mother, had made a terrible mistake by sharing his voice with the world? Number 1, was he singing for 2? This is one of the earliest and most important entries. It is undated, but seems to be from the very beginning of his career at Sun Records. It is the key that might unlock everything else. Jesse was the angel. He got to go home. I have to stay here and sing for 2. Elvis Presley was born an identical twin. On January 8, 1935, in Tupelo, Mississippi, his brother Jesse Garon Presley was delivered stillborn 35 minutes before Elvis. This event, which happened before Elvis took his first breath, would shadow his entire existence. This journal entry is a direct and devastating expression of the psychological impact of being a twinless twin. It's a phenomenon that psychologists have studied. Surviving twins often experience a profound sense of loneliness, a feeling that a part of themselves is missing. They can also suffer from a deep-seated survivor's guilt. The journal entry contains both of these elements. Jesse was the angel. He got to go home. In the simple religious worldview of his childhood, his brother had gone directly to heaven. He was pure, perfect, and safe with God. Elvis, on the other hand, was left behind in the imperfect earthly world. This created a dynamic where Jesse was the perfect spiritual half and Elvis was the flawed physical half. He felt incomplete. The final line is the most powerful. I have to stay here and sing for two. This suggests that he felt a profound, lifelong responsibility to live for both himself and his lost brother. He had been given the life that Jesse was denied, and he had to make it count for something. He had to achieve enough, be successful enough, be loved enough for two people. This is an immense psychological burden for anyone to carry, let alone a young man who is about to become the most famous person on the planet. This single entry could be seen as the Rosetta Stone for understanding Elvis's personality. It could explain his deep, abiding loneliness, even when surrounded by people. It could explain his need for the entourage, an attempt to fill the empty space beside him. It could explain his spiritual searching, a desire to understand the mystery of life and death, and perhaps to communicate with the other half of his soul. It could also explain his drive. The need to sing for two might have been the fuel for his incredible ambition. But it also meant that no amount of success would ever be enough. How could he ever be sure that he had lived up to the life of the perfect angelic brother who existed only in his imagination? This could have created a perpetual feeling of inadequacy, a hunger that could never be satisfied, which might have manifested in his excesses with food, spending, and eventually drugs. He was, in a sense, always performing for an audience of one, the ghost of his brother. This leaves us with the most fundamental questions of all. Was the man the world knew as Elvis Presley only half a person? Was his entire life a conversation with his lost twin? And was the immense talent and charisma that the world saw a gift that came from the desperate need to fill an unimaginable void, the need to sing loud enough for two worlds to hear?